Wander Wealthy Podcast, episode 167 with Jill Parekh. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Wander Wealthy Podcast. My name is Tess Wicks. I am your host, founder of Wander Wealthy, and your grounded business coach, helping you create a life-changing offer, find your ideal clients, and make more money. Today, I am joined by an amazing guest. Her name is Jill Parekh, and she is an Imposter Syndrome coach. You guys, I don't know about you, but if you say you haven't suffered from imposter syndrome, I would call you a liar. Imposter syndrome is such a big part of building a business, and especially building a coaching business, because you're essentially claiming expertise, authority, and leadership in your own world, in your own sphere, and then you're taking it and, offering a solution to others. And especially with money coaching, it comes up so much. So Jill is joining us to share her expertise on imposter syndrome, help you identify if you've been feeling some of the feelings that are kind of underlying to this overarching imposter syndrome brand. And we also talk about niching, because Jill's an imposter syndrome coach. That is such a specific niche, and I think it is so empowering and powerful. And we actually figured out, or maybe I just had the revelation, I'm sure Jill already knew this, but niching is such a powerful way to help you overcome imposter syndrome. And she also shares some other great tips with us. I also wanted to say that Jill is one of the most inspirational human beings that I have ever met. We met at our coaching certification, getting certified in neurolinguistic programming, hypnotherapy, EFT tapping, and time techniques, as well as life and success coaching. And it was just so cool to meet her and hear her story and learn about the work that she does. So let's get to it. Here is episode 167 with Jill Parekh. Jill, welcome to the Wander Wealthy podcast. I am so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me.
So I've already done a formal introduction for you, but I'd love for you to just share your story around how you got to where you are today being an imposter syndrome coach.
Yeah, for sure. So it was one of those things where I took psychology and all that jazz in university, and I was like, am I going to go the therapy route? Because that's what usually happens, right? Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, am I going to go that route? But there was just something about it that was super rigid, and it wasn't necessarily something that I could see long term. And I kind of jumped into coaching in terms of just being like, I know that Tony Robbins does it. So I'm like, hey, that looks cool. So let's see if we can start with something like that. So I built out my website and did a bunch of stuff. And then I opened officially in January 2018. And I initially started with just generalized life coaching. But what I realized as I was doing it is I was feeling those feelings I had in university where I just didn't feel good enough. I didn't feel smart enough or capable enough. I thought that no one would want what I'm offering. And it was really conflicting with seeing people in the industry that were doing this type of coaching, and they were being so successful. And I just couldn't figure out why it wasn't working for me. And then in January 2019, I started working with my first coach. And when I started working with her, I started realizing how all of these feelings that I learned was imposter syndrome was something that a lot of entrepreneurs, especially coaches in the industry, were dealing with. And it was really stopping them from showing up, being consistent, and really owning their own power. So for me, I was okay, this is something that I could definitely tap into. And it was through working through my own inner imposter syndrome that I thought this would be a really good niche to go in on. And that's how I got started into it, was really just focusing on my own story and how I overcame that.
Mm. I love that. And I have a question for you about niching later
Mhm.
because I think it is so important. And I mean, when I met you, so total transparency, Jill and I met at our certification. I've had a wave of interviews of people I met at the certification. I'm like,
Oh,
because they're so awesome and we have to share their
amazing.
stories.
Yes.
So we met at our certification. And when you introduced yourself as an imposter syndrome coach, I was like, that is so freaking specific. I love it. Like,
Oh, God, I love that. Thank
I
you.
never thought that, I just never even considered that someone could coach on that because I hadn't seen it before. And I'm like, oh my God, that makes 100% complete sense. It is such a big problem that faces the coaching industry and that you can coach other people on that. It just like, it's so important and it's so cool that you just through niching into that, then you become the expert. And then you're the top of mind expert for people who are kind of resonating with it and going, oh my gosh, this is what I'm feeling. Wait, I saw this. I saw someone who called themselves an imposter syndrome coach. Oh my gosh, they can help me. They can help me overcome these things.
Exactly. And I think there's so much like fear and uncertainty in niching down because people think, well, that just means that I'm going to like not appeal to everybody. But in reality, you are putting yourself in the front of where somebody looks when they're like looking for a specific problem. And
Mm-hmm.
it may feel like it's limiting in the beginning, but it honestly isn't if you're just consistent and you really become creative with that specific niche. Because in the beginning, I was like, okay, how am I going to like talk about content and do all this stuff? But it just came with time. And even though you think it's a smaller topic, it actually has so many different areas in which like self-sabotage, procrastination, perfectionism, all these things that are tied to feeling like a fraud.
Mm-hmm. I love
Totally.
it. I think you're so spot on with that. And we're just going to cover the niching topic right now because we're getting in too deep.
Yeah.
Um, you're so spot on with that in the sense that I think all of us, I remember, even if I zoom out to like thinking about becoming a business owner, like going to become an entrepreneur, I didn't know that I was going to become a coach. And I shared that on a solo show recently. Um, and it's so funny because when you think about just like doing your own thing, I feel like sometimes you don't know if you can do anything. And then you kind of get into the world of entrepreneurship and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many things that I could do. How am I even going to pick? And a lot of people make the mistake of like jumping around from thing to thing or from market to market without really getting specific. And then the fear around getting specific is like, but is there going to be enough? Is there going to be enough to talk about? Are there going to be enough people? And then once you get into it, you recognize that like even if you picked, okay, I just coach coaches, like I'm a coach for coaches, which is
Yeah.
obviously very broad and generic.
Mhm.
That's when you recognize that there's like so many problems that you could solve that then you
Mhm.
probably get imposter syndrome because you don't feel good enough to work with all of those problems, which is warranted because there's a ton of them. And so actually I feel like niching can actually be one of the cures for imposter syndrome in a sense because you start to
Totally.
become an expert in that niche.
Oh my gosh, totally. And it's so helpful again when you're creating content and creating services because you have that specific problem to help people. And this is like something that I hear a lot is that people are worried, okay, if I niche down, then my audience pool gets smaller and blah, blah, blah. And then I can only talk about that specific problem. But then I'm like, but in your actual coaching services, you can talk about so many different things. It's just with your content and how you like show yourself off to your audience. If you have a specific problem that you're consistently solving for them, they're going to see you as that authority figure. And then when you go into your actual coaching services with them, then you can broaden up the scope of how you can help them.
Ugh, I love this. I feel like this wasn't supposed to be a niching or like a marketing podcast episode, but it is so interesting how it really parallels that imposter syndrome and being able to help you become that authority and really feeling like the expert and then thus not the fraud. And in addition to that, I think when it comes to like, I feel like probably the biggest hurdle is how am I going to have enough content to create? And what I think is a big mistake that a lot of business owners make, and maybe you'll recognize this through your coaches or through your clients, as well as through your own experience, is thinking that they need to reinvent the wheel constantly. And so when you have a niche and you have only like a certain amount of content, that you can think of to create, which like it always just like evolves into more and more and more. But if you think about it, even in like pillars, if you're like, okay, well, niching, well, there's only a couple pillars that I can talk about. Like, that's the point though. And I think that people, they disregard the fact that like, if you're creating content, people need to hear content more than once for them to initially invest with you. And like, that's where you're establishing your authority and your expertise. And you're talking about you are kind of talking about the same thing over and over again in different ways. And so you're going to niche down to this specific thing where you can truly be the authority. And yes, you might sound like a broken record, but that's also the point until those people ultimately trust you to then work with you, where then kind of the doors open up and you're like, okay, now I can coach you along this specific problem, but then whatever kind of ancillary problems that come of it, or supplemental problems that come of it, I also can help assist you there too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And like your like audience is always expanding. So you always have new people coming to your content and seeing something for the first time.
Right.
And I think it also helps your inner imposter when you feel like you don't have to like create all the time and you can reuse stuff, because like a lot of people that come to me are like, I'm not creative and I feel like I can't ever come up with like new ideas and new content. But that comes from the expectation or a story that you're really telling yourself that if you were a good coach, you would be able to come up with new content. But that's just like a story that you're really telling yourself, because the entrepreneurs that I see who are really huge in the online space are constantly like regurgitating the same information. And everyone all the time is like, wow, this is so groundbreaking. This is so amazing. And it's like, because new people are going to consistently come to your content. And even if they're not new, they're going to be like, oh, she's talking about a certain topic again. And another thing with that too is like with free content, people don't always implement on free content. So they could read something of yours and take something away the second time than they did the first time.
Yeah. And it's like, if you're talking about it again, that must mean it's important. And I think people can pick up on that. And then the other aspect is like, if they're thinking, oh, now I've heard it a couple of times from you, I understand it's important, I'm actually implementing it. They're probably moving down the funnel to then working with you as a coach or as, whatever type of business owner you are. But those who listen and my niche are money coaches. So if you're a money coach and you're, worried about talking, maybe you're specifically focused on helping people with student loans, and that's the problem that you solve, and that's the niche that you serve. If you're constantly talking about student loans, like there's certain pillars within that make sense to be talking about and to be repeating over and over. And once the people have like soaked all of that up, they should be advancing to the next stage, which probably isn't your free content stage, right?
Right, exactly. Totally.
Awesome. So I want to back up a little bit, because we haven't gotten to the definition of imposter syndrome. And I think that there's so many people who feel the feelings of imposter syndrome, but don't have the words to describe it. And you've mentioned some of these various feelings before, but I'd love from the imposter syndrome coach herself to tell us, like, how can we identify if this is something that we are struggling with?
So by its actual definition, imposter syndrome is the persistent internalized fear of being revealed as a fraud. And as an entrepreneur, it really comes into those feelings of unworthiness. Who am I to do this? I'm not good enough to do this. It's hard, so maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Or this person said this comment to me. So that could mean that I'm not a good coach. And there's so many different strains of it, again, in terms of like perfectionism and procrastinating, because when we're trying to like make something perfect, it's because we constantly think that it's not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing when we're really like avoiding working on something, it's because there's some deeper emotional story that we are attributing to that task as to why we don't want to get that done. And there's also the fear of rejection, the fear of failure, and there's just a lot of things that ultimately come down to our feelings of not being worthy, of not being good enough. And these are derived from the stories that we tell ourselves that are coming from our childhood, from our experience as teenagers, from our worldview and our beliefs about the world and about ourselves. So it's a lot deeper than just being afraid to be revealed as a fraud, because it really just goes down to all these stories that we're telling ourselves because of previous experiences and beliefs that have made us believe that we're not worthy of all the things that come with being a coach.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much.
Yeah. And I think that is perfectly said and can help a lot of people start to identify if they've struggled with some of those feelings, and some of those thoughts. And I think something else that might put some people at ease is that if you're feeling like a fraud, a lot of people who are high achievers actually feel like they aren't enough. Like, this is where I feel like the term ignorance is bliss is really, really accurate, because there are so many people who, you might look at and you might think like, I can't believe they can just like do it without, crossing off all the boxes and without making it perfect. And I see so many, faults in what they're offering. And I personally have done this, and we get into comparison, but we don't need to go down that road. I've also worked with my clients on this, because we all are looking left and right and seeing what other people are doing, and in some way you can compare up and go, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough, but in some way you can compare down and go, I can't believe if they can do it, why is it so hard for me? And usually it's because you can do it, but you have gotten to the level of like consciousness where you hold yourself to these really high standards that then you're not allowing yourself to like put it out there and potentially fail.
Yes. And like, again, you can be like hustling for your worth at that rate as well, because nothing you do is good enough, even though if someone else were to see what you were capable of actually doing, they would be like, wow, this is amazing. But for some reason, you just don't think it's good enough. And I think that really goes to, again, worthiness. So it doesn't really matter if like you're hustling for your worth, or if you're like doing the absolute bare minimum. I think that we all have those underlying feelings of not being good enough. And it's from unpeeling that not good enough in terms of understanding where these stories come from and how we can actually overcome them and release them to get what we really want. And I think a big part of that is really like celebrating how far you've come, because a lot of people that are usually overachievers and are hustling for their worth very rarely look back at what they've accomplished, or just simply think that their worthiness is only incumbent on what they will do in the future.
That's so wise and so true. And I love that. And I would love for you to share maybe a couple more tips, along with like looking back and seeing what you've achieved and recognizing that there are people behind you who just want to get to where you're at the crux of it. Like, if you're going to be a coach and you're going to help people with their money, some people don't care about like your expertise around investing, because what they are impressed with is your ability to pay off debt. And that's what you've accomplished personally, or that's what you've helped other people accomplish. And now you can help them. And I'd love for you to share a couple more ways that we can deal with imposter syndrome. And I know some of them require like deeper work, but if there's anything that we can even maybe start to do today to really pull us out, or, I don't know if it's good to say like snap some sense into us to see that we are worthy.
Yeah. So one of the things that I started doing was naming my inner imposter. Now her name is Rhonda.
Mm.
And Rhonda is that mean girl that says all the stuff to me, like, you're not good enough. This isn't going to be good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not capable enough, whatever. And what I started doing was whenever I was having those self-sabotaging thoughts, I would discern her from what was actually true. So I would say, okay, so Rhonda is telling me right now that this Instagram post isn't good enough, but what is actually true? So constantly like being really aware of the way you're speaking to yourself, especially if you're in like the comparison trap, or if you're scrolling on Instagram and you see somebody, because as you know, we have that subconscious track running through us at all times, right?
Yeah.
Those stories that we think are true about ourselves and about the world. So it can be really subconscious and really quick when we're just scrolling on Instagram and all of a sudden we see what she's doing and we're like, why can't I have that? Well, I can't have that because of this and I'm not good enough. And then all of a sudden we're not working on that project that we were going to work on this afternoon because we're feeling really crappy about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely have like a name for your inner imposter, and it just helps make it a little bit more like impersonal and just helps like separate yourself from something that's not you. So I would say that for sure has been super helpful for me. Also talking about it with people who really understand you. So if you have entrepreneurial friends, like I highly recommend having somebody who you can like speak to and kind of talk about it with, because there's such shame around feeling like a fraud. There's such shame around feeling like, am I good enough to do this? Because again, we worry that someone is going to be like, oh, you feel like a fraud, so are you actually capable of doing this? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So definitely have somebody who you can like speak to and relate to in that regard. And then also I would say to keep like an accomplishment journal of some sort. So keep a record of your wins, no matter how small or no matter how big, because you will really realize how far you've come when you are constantly looking at that and seeing all the stuff that you have accomplished. So those are my like 3 tips.
I love it. That's so good. I love naming your inner imposter. I think that's brilliant. And it really separates you from some of these thoughts that maybe you don't want to associate with. And so you can be like, damn it, Rhonda, or whatever you want to call her or him. Yeah. So I'd love to go into the money round. And, on this podcast, we're really focused on serving money coaches, but I think it's really important to keep the money conversation open as well, because we all are experiencing money flowing in and out of our lives very differently. And I just love the story and the mindset and even like the actual tangibleness around money and talking about it. So first, I'm really just curious to know your money story, meaning how did you grow up around money and what did you learn about money when you were growing up, and has that been a good relationship or was it a bad relationship? Maybe not bad, but...
We're getting deep here, Tess.
Yep, let's dive in. Here we go. Take your bra off.
Okay. Oh, it's already off. I'm working at home. That's not happening. Okay, so my money story. I guess I always grew up around having money, but always kind of feeling like it wasn't like expendable. Like I had it to do all the things that we wanted to do, but my parents would always kind of talk about it like money doesn't grow on trees and all of that type
Mm-hmm.
of stuff. So I kind of grew up in a more scarce mindset, not necessarily in needing the stuff that I needed to survive, but just in terms of extras always seemed like really big luxuries that I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
So even though we went on a lot of like family vacations, I would always feel bad about coming back to school and being like, oh yeah, I was just in wherever. And like people would almost like, I would internalize their reactions as like people thinking I was spoiled or rich or something. So I always tried to like downplay that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And like now that I'm kind of talking about it, I don't know why, but I just kind of would downplay those luxuries. And even as I got older and I would like get my hair done or get my nails done or something, like everybody would kind of be like, oh, like you're so high maintenance, blah, blah, blah. So it was almost like those little luxuries were like, I should only have enough
Mm-hmm.
and extra things are unnecessary.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I love that. And I don't think I've ever shared this, but when I grew up in a really fortunate household. My dad owns a construction company. My mom was an architect. She actually stayed at home with us. But I mean, architect plus construction man, we had a big house.
Mhm.
And I remember during my like, I don't remember the grade per se, but it was definitely, probably like when I was between 10 and 13, kids at school would be like, "Oh, Tess's family hides money under their
Oh,
staircase." Like we had like a door in our basement that we put our Christmas tree in, like it was like a storage thing under our staircase, and they were like, "That's where Tess's family hides money." And it was shameful for me, and I carried that for a really long time, being like, I don't want people to think that we're just these like big bad rich people that hide money under our staircase. And that was something that I really had to come to terms with. So I feel you on almost wanting to be like, I don't want people to think we're rich, or I don't want, like, whether you were or you weren't,
mhm.
it's like you don't want people to think that, because and honestly, I think from a subconscious programming state, it's just because you want to be accepted with all your friends that you are like going to school with, and you want them to be like, that's normal and welcome to our tribe. And you don't want to get ejected from the tribe for being different, whether that means that your family gets to go on vacations and theirs doesn't, or whatever that is.
Exactly. And I think that as an entrepreneur, it really informed like hitting that next income level because
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, I just need enough, but I was getting frustrated because I was like, why can't I hit the next level? And it was because I had all these stories around having more than enough.
Mm,
So I think that when I started releasing stuff like that, it really helped me hit that next income level because I was realizing that like it's safe and it's okay to have more than enough.
Yeah, enough is such an interesting word that we use, because in some senses it's very limiting, and in others, but the way that we use it, it seems like it's plentiful. Like if you think about like, oh, well, how do they, if you're curious about a household, you're like, how do they do? And then you hear like your mom be like, they make enough, or like they have enough.
Totally,
It
yes.
means like they make a lot, but then when we think about it, we're like, well, I wouldn't want more than enough. And it becomes really limiting. So that's super interesting.
For sure.
So I'd love to know, how do you earn money?
How do I earn money? So I work full time for an organization in my home. And then I am a coach, as you guys know. And so I earn it through my full time job, which is about twice a month is when I get paid.
Mm-hmm.
And then with coaches, because it like depends on like what I'm launching and what I'm doing. I usually have about 2 to 3 one-on-one clients, and that's my more like consistent income during the month.
Mm-hmm.
And but then you get these kind of like injections of like cash during a certain type of launch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's how I earn money.
Amazing. What's the last thing you spent a lot of money on, and how did you, get yourself to do that?
So the last time I spent a lot of money was when I joined a mastermind back in October.
Mm.
And so it was about, for me being in Canada, because it was in US dollars, so it came to about almost $7,000
Mm-hmm.
for the mastermind. And it was honestly such a smart decision, because just the community that you have inside of something like that and the support you have inside something like that, like I experienced a ton of growth from that. And if somebody were to ask me like things that they should invest in during the beginning of their coaching business, I would say stuff that will help you personally develop, because you are your greatest resource. And
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're investing in yourself during this time, like, you really can't screw it up.
Yeah. How I'm always curious, like when people invest in, high ticket programs, coaches, all those types of things, how did you find it?
How did I find it? It was through Instagram. So this girl who I knew on Instagram, she was just showing up consistently, and she was talking about just the support that we would have inside this group. So it was really about that relationship I had with her. And like, that's
Mm-hmm.
why I think it's so important to show up so authentically as yourself, and how it can be so hard for people, because if they're suffering with that inner imposter telling them that they shouldn't say this or they shouldn't do this, they could really be limiting themselves from like speaking directly to somebody who really needs to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Jill, thank you so much for answering all of these questions. I know, especially the money round, it's always like, you want me to talk about what? So really appreciate that. We're going to get into the quick and dirty Q&A, which are just a couple of fast-paced questions to wrap up the show. And the first one is my favorite. I want to know something completely random that you just can't stop thinking about lately. And it can't have anything to do with your business. Too many people try to get away with that. It's got to be something else.
Okay, I have been watching the fucking Vampire Diaries for the last 2 weeks. And I kid you not, I have watched like over 50 hours of it. I'm on season 4, almost at the end of it, and I've only started it in like the last 2 weeks. So that's my thing that I'm doing right now.
No shame in that game. My fiance and I have been watching Game of Thrones.
Oh,
So
amazing, amazing.
we're on season 5, I think. So we're really just like hammering through it. We're like, we need to do something else with our time. But what can you do? It's COVID-19. Amazing. What's something you love to do outside of quarantine on a normal, week? What's something you love to do that allows you to step away from your business?
I like to go on like just like really long walks, and just like really enjoying being outside and just like not being connected to my cell phone, and just kind of actually being alone on the walks, and just like being there with like what I have to think about that day and stuff like that. It just really helps me like reset. So
Amazing. I love long walks. I'm a walker. What's your favorite account recently? Because I feel like it would switch for me a lot. What's your favorite account to follow on social media?
One of the accounts where it's a meme.
Mm.
Let me look. Like just like those certain accounts where you just like look at them and you just sit there and you just like get lost down like the rabbit hole, and you just start like reading stuff, and it helps you just like feel really good, especially during a time like this. Like, we just all need to like take a load off and just like relax, because I feel like we consume a lot of news all day, every day.
Yes.
And it's good to just like relax a little bit. So
Yes. Sometimes I have to, like, I follow a couple of meme accounts, and then I have to like research things because I'm like, wait, I don't get it. What did I miss?
oh, that's funny.
Life is hard. Tell us about your favorite piece of financial advice, or the best piece of financial advice that you've been told that you like to pass along.
Oh, that's a good one. Oh my gosh, that's a really good one. I wish I would have known that. Wish I would have read that one. Let's see. My favorite piece of financial advice would have to be, I think it would be like just enjoying what you have now, because you can't take it with you when you die, which is super morbid. But I come from a family history where like they came from the war, so they didn't have a lot and they hoard a lot of their money. So I think with that, it just like unlearning all those things that that like it's unsafe to have it or to like spend it, and to really focus on enjoying what I have now, and just like enjoying that and not feeling guilty about enjoying the things that I want to do, because at the end of the day, we don't know how long we have on the earth, and to like hoard or to feel like you're not good enough to spend what you want to spend. I mean, within reason, obviously.
Yeah.
But like enjoying things like going on vacation and going out to supper and like doing things that you actually enjoy, because like that's what it's all about.
Yeah. I was just doing a podcast interview earlier today, and we got onto this topic about spending money. And, it's been a challenge for me around really feeling what I kind of boiled it down to was like, when you're a coach, let's say, like as a coach, you start to think like, oh, if someone doesn't want to pay for my services, then they don't think I'm worthy. But really what it is they don't believe they're worthy to invest in you, because as a coach, you're going to like give them this experience that will change their life. I mean, like, let's take a money coach, for instance. Like, you're going to hold the space for them. You're going to hold them accountable. You're going to provide them resources. You're going to, if you have mindset techniques and skills, you're going to help them with, really uncovering some deep ass shit. And that's an investment that they get to make in their life to really feel worthy. And I think what happens a lot of times is we think money is only for survival, so that's all it can be spent on. And when we have a surplus, we can even get like, I've never really needed anything in terms of like making money. I've always had enough to survive. But then I've gotten into I used to be in this mindset of like, I'm not worthy of spending more than that on myself. Like, you can take designer bags, for instance. Like, I would always look at designer bags and be like, it'd be cool to have one, but I don't see, I would say the designer bag isn't worth it, but really like I still needed a bag. So I would go buy it at Target and I'd wear it and I'd be like, this is my Target purse that I wish was a designer bag. And it's like, or I could just decide that I'm worth it to be able to own and purchase and have a designer bag. And the same can go for like looking at a coach and thinking like, you might first and foremost, when they tell you the price, be like, well, that's not worth it. But really, like, it's either you hire the coach or you don't. And you can always flip the script and put yourself in the coach's position. But like, the coach can't take it personally, because it's up to you whether you see like that you are worth making that investment for yourself to have that type of attention and guidance and accountability that a coach can provide you.
Yeah. And I just think that in terms of just making those types of decisions, it's just, you have to really, again, is this my like inner imposter, or is my like inner critic telling me that I don't deserve it? Because if we really assess all those stories from like childhood and our previous experiences, we'll realize that like it's not our true selves talking when we say stuff like that to ourselves. So yes, I love that.
I love that you wrapped it in imposter syndrome, like wrapped it up with imposter syndrome. That just goes to show how much of an expert you are in this niche, and I love it. So, Jill, thank you so much for joining us today. This conversation, I think is so important. And I think a lot of those listening, everyone out there listening, they're really going to appreciate this conversation and the work that you personally do and how you actually are specifically working on this massive struggle that can manifest in many different ways. So thank you very much for sharing with us your tips and opening up to us. I'd love for you to tell us where we can find you so we can come hang out and see what you're up to and work with you.
For sure. So I think the number one spot is going to be on Instagram at Your Coach Jill. And that's where I talk about my podcast and I have my site and all that stuff. So if you just go directly there, you will see all the things that you need to know.
Perfect. My favorite place to hang out too. So we got you. Jill, thanks again for joining us. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Episode 167 with Jill Parekh. You guys can get access to the show notes by going to wanderwealthypodcast.com/podcast/episode 167. And don't forget to follow Jill at Your Coach Jill on Instagram and tag us. And here's a little fun challenge. We would love you to take a screenshot of the episode or just take any picture, tag us at Your Coach Jill, at Tess_Wicks, and tell us the name of your inner imposter. And if you want to hear mine, I am doing a podcast recording on Jill's podcast. So make sure you go check her podcast out because we did a little swap during this recording session. And you'll get to hear my stories, my experiences with imposter syndrome, doing the money coaching thing, and you'll get to hear what I have named my inner imposter. So thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Remember, if you want to build your online money, wealth, financial coaching business, whatever you want to call it, that's right, you get to pick. You can reach out to me. I have put together something that I call the Wealthy Coach Blueprint. This is an 8-step curriculum plus a 12-week coaching program where you're going to get so much support, so much education, so much accountability and homework and feedback that you're going to be so supported you're not going to know, you're going to look back and be like, how did I accomplish so much over the course of 12 weeks? And even the first couple of weeks. This program I have developed specifically for those who are aspiring, brand new, or frustrated money coaches who have been working with a couple of people, maybe pro bono, maybe just low price, maybe you've been working with a couple of clients, but you haven't been able to really hit your stride. And you're hoping to do so because you want to take this or make this a full-time sustainable business. Let me be the person to tell you that it is possible and we can do it. I can help you with building out your thriving coaching business, help you create a life-changing offer, help you find those ideal dream clients that are out there, and help you make some money, girlfriend or boyfriend. So go to wanderwealthy.com/apply. That will take you to the blueprint. You can check it out. And if you feel like this is the right time, you can fill out an application and we will jump on a little strategy call. So wanderwealthy.com/apply. Thank you so much for joining me again today. I hope to be speaking with you very soon. And until next time, I hope you wander wealthy.